Hey, you! Should you play Final Fantasy 1? It just recently got remastered over on Steam. Should you play it? Well, hopefully this video could help out. Final Fantasy is a fantasy role-playing game that was developed and published by Square Enix all the way back in 1987, before they were even called Square Enix, when they were just Square. Now, the franchise of Final Fantasy is a classic among many, especially the very first installment within the franchise. If you don't know what this game is, let me give you a quick little synopsis breakdown of what this game is. The combat in Final Fantasy is menu-based. The player selects an action from a list of options such as attack, magic, or item, and battles are turn-based, so one side gets attacked and the next side gets attacked. And you'll continue on each side until one side is defeated. Obviously, if you defeat the enemy and you kill everybody, then you win. You get XP, you get money, and sometimes you get rare items. Now, if the enemy defeats your whole party, you have a game over screen and you have to start over from when you last saved. Through winning battles, you get XP, which then lets you level up, which then allows you to gain new skills and moves. That's in most of the major Final Fantasy games. So the first one is a little bit more basic and simple since it's the very first one and was made all the way back in 1987. But through growing with levels, you are able, as mages specifically, you're able to get new magic spells. Speaking of which, this game features right at the very beginning, you get to pick what classes or what characters you want to be. Whether it's a warrior, thief, red mage, white mage, black mage, or even a monk. And for this very first installment, you are set out on a journey to relight 4 elemental crystals to save the world. But let me give you some quick pros and cons of the game that should help you decide whether you should play this game or not. The first pro we got is that the gameplay itself is very simple. It's not complicated, it's not extravagant, and even later on with like optional boss or optional content, it's not all there, mostly because this is the very first installment. So this is before JRPGs really got extravagant and became so many optional content, so much X, Y, and Z you could do, while instead here it's more simple, more laid back, and even the comments itself, since it's limited, you don't gain so many skills and stuff like that. It's pretty simple of what you can do, what you can't do, and could be a little bit easier for somebody who's new to a JRPG. The second pro is that this game is short, as mentioned before, because it's an older JRPG. This is before games were 60 hours long or more. This is only if you don't know this game, if you've never played it before. It should take about 15 to 25 hours. More leaning on the 25, but still, that's pretty low for today's standards for JRPGs. Now, the last pro for this game is its story itself, and that's because while today's standards it may look at as kind of already done by grabbing the 4 elemental things to save the world, this is when it really first got started, that story being told. And even with that, there's still some side stuff within the game that it does to kind of spice it up that I wasn't expecting when going through it myself. Now, there are some cons that I want to warn you about, so let's head on over and let's go talk about these cons. The very first one is a con that I've given a lot of games before, and that's if it's an older game, it may struggle with its direction for the players. New games nowadays have a lot of reminders, a lot of things that help the player know where to go next. This game doesn't do it. It's pretty archaic in the sense that you really have to rely on talking to everyone, and I mean everyone, to find out where to go next, even with just little hints. Because of that, it's just easy to get lost, and that simply can't be fun at times. As long as you talk to everybody and you pay attention to dialogue, you should be fine to figure out. Now, the next con has to do with the enemies itself, and that's mostly because of what these enemies are based on. Now, for the most part, when creators look at enemies and decide on what they want to do to fill this game with monsters, it's very easy to just grab a mass of monsters that are associated with much different cultures just because they're wildly known. This game, for example, does this with having mostly a lot of Greek monsters. That's where you get your Minotaurs, your Hydras, your Chimeras, stuff like that is very popular to see in many other games, and it's here too. There is one monster specifically that you might want to worry about a little bit though, and that has to do with Mariluth, Naga, and Echidna. These 3 monsters are based on several different religions, and one specifically is very heavily more on the sexual theme. We see this monster a lot of times in a bunch of other games. It's very iconic in itself. And while saying that, in other games I would say it's much worse because usually they portray it a lot more heavier on the side of what we see in mythology, more present day adaptations of being more clothless and a little bit more on the temptress side. Luckily on this one, they did decide to clothe her, and it's a little bit less presumptuous, and because it's an old game with its old graphics, it's hard to really see anything, and it's hard to really be a real sexual temptation, but it is there, just so I need to warn you guys about. And these other monsters like Naga is actually based on Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, kind of looked at as being a semi-divine being. We also got Echidna, which is also just another Greek monster, which is sometimes looked at as the mother of a lot of monsters that we know. But those two, how they're portrayed in the game isn't as sexualized as, again, as sometimes these monsters can be portrayed within culture and pop media. Now, the very last con that we have to talk about is the story itself. Because the story itself is focused around gathering or relighting these 4 elemental crystals, it really looks at Greek cosmology when looking at these 4 crystals. And so we have that backdrop to the foundation of the story. Now, we won't talk too much about that, but that is there. So again, another con for this game. But that's gonna do it for today. If you have to ask me personally what I would say to you if you came up to me like, hey Noah, what should I play? Should I play this game? I would say yes, because it's an old school game. It's a classic among many JRPGs, and it's very simple, and I think it's easy enough for newcomers. The cons that I did present are there, but I don't think they're anything too drastic besides that one monster, which is very pixelated, so it's not really too much of a sexual temptation. But beyond that, I think even with the setting of the story being a little bit seeped into some Greek cosmology, I think it's still worthwhile to play. If you are worried though, and you want to know more about possible connections that these monsters have to the story or to real world religions, or if you want to know more about the Greek cosmology and its connection with these 4 elementals and maybe a little bit more, go check out my next video. It's within this playlist down below, kind of, I think it's actually here. It's over here. Right down there, there's a playlist that has this video and the other video once it's out. And then right above is actually a live playthrough that I did of this game. So yeah, go check it out. Have fun. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope this helps you if you want to know if you should play this game. All right. Basically, the game plan is, I guess, to go to the top right. Oh, look, I can move my cursor. Look at this. So yeah, all of this over here